Good Friday evening to you. Hope your weekend is off to a great start. Thanks for joining More Sports and Less. Levine, Dave Bacon here. We will talk plenty of Browns football, where the Browns might look in the draft, what the Browns might look at as far as salary cap casualties, and what the Browns will look at as far as contract extension goes, all coming up. And when we talk Browns, we always bring in Ellis Williams, Browns beat reporter here on cleveland.com, as well as in the pages of the Plain Dealer. Ellis, let's begin with the obvious. Browns were a playoff team this year. They went from a non-playoff team that struggled to a playoff team. Next step is to go to a championship contender. There's a lot of conventional wisdom that always says it's tougher to go from playoff team to championship contender than it is from non-playoff team to playoff team. You feel that's true? Some of the challenges that stand before the Browns as they try to elevate, where they are.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Dave. Again, thanks for having me. I think that the hardest part about going from good to great is trying to figure out where those improvements must come. Do you win in the margins? Do you win in the roster spots, 12 to 24? Is that where you try to improve? Or is it about finding those excellent game-changing players? Now, of course, in a perfect world, you do both, but there's only so much resources which you can allocate, which we saw this past offseason where the Browns basically prioritized the offensive side of the football, signing Jack Conklin, Austin Hooper, and then resorting to one-year deals in free agency on defense, and then spending that 10th overall pick at offensive tackle, and then some middle round picks on the defense. Of course, Grant Delpit being their second round pick, who wasn't able to play this year. So really, we're evaluating the players we saw so far this season, and they don't know exactly what they're going to get out of Delpit. Same goes for Greedy Williams, which is going to make this draft really interesting, which I'm sure is something we're going to get into. But again, I can't reiterate enough how difficult the jump from good to excellent will be. We saw what the Chiefs are. They dismantled the Buffalo Bills. This seems like their conference for a long time coming. So this seems like a 2-year project for Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski to figure out, okay, how do we get better in the margins? How do we improve our safety, our linebacking core, maybe get Myles Garrett another edge rusher? And then at the same time, where do we find that game-breaking talent like the Chiefs showed all across the field? It's not just Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce. We saw what Cole Hardman did against the Bills. They've got skill guys everywhere that can take the top off, swing a game at any moment, and that's what the Browns will be looking for in the draft, along with filling in the margins.
You wrote a real interesting piece about what we learned from the Browns' defense this year. Take us through that and just how that might impact, as you move forward.
Yeah, when we look back on the Browns' season, the offense obviously stands out, and I think people tend to be hard on a defense that really was playing behind the 8 ball from the start. I already mentioned Grant Delpit's injury, Greedy Williams. Joe Woods is a type of defensive coordinator that wants to play more defensive backs than bigger guys on the field. Now, he wants to rush 4 with his 4 interior linemen, but if he could swap out a linebacker for another safety and deploy 3 safeties or a really talented slot corner, nickel corner, he would prefer to do that. The Browns just didn't have that talent this year, which starts with at top again with the injuries I keep mentioning. And that's where I think we have to start when it comes to the evaluation of Joe Woods. He was dealt a bad hand this year. I think he made the best of what he had. The Browns ranking, I think, 19th against the run, 25th against the pass, but they really made their money as a turnover creating team. They were +5 in turnover differential. I believe they finished in the top 10 in takeaways. That is what the Browns' MO was this year on defense. Now, I don't believe turnovers are all that sustainable. There's a lot of data that points that out year to year. So now it's up to the front office to do what they did for Stefanski last season on the offensive side of the ball and give Joe Woods even more talent on top of the guys he has returning. Secondly, I think it's really important to mention that Myles Garrett has arrived. He's on track and really is the heir apparent to Aaron Donald as the best defensive player in football. I think he's just scratching the surface on what he can become, and that might sound crazy, a guy who came in here as the first overall pick, a guy that has already cashed in on that big payday. But I truly believe if anyone's going to challenge Michael Strahan's single-season sack record, it's going to be Myles Garrett. Now, of course, he's still chasing that Cleveland Browns franchise record, but I think both, if he's going to do it, will get got in the same year. And we got to remember this about Myles. He's had 2 back-to-back really difficult ends to his season. Of course, 2 years ago with the Pittsburgh Steelers incident, he didn't finish the year there. And then this past season, he was on a tear, 9 sacks through 8 games, 4 forced fumbles. And then he catches COVID. misses 2 games, and he was very vocal about how he didn't feel like he was himself, getting his air back, and the challenges that come with dealing with COVID-19. So assuming all that is behind him now and entering 2021, and no bad breaks or bad injuries, he puts together a full 16-game season. I anticipate next year we're going to see Myles Garrett really challenge Aaron Donald as the best defensive player in football, and he should be the early season favorite for Defensive Player of the Year.
Well, last year you mentioned, the Browns put all the pieces around Baker Mayfield to make sure they knew what they had in Baker Mayfield. Do you see him trying to do a similar thing this year with Myles Garrett? Find someone who can put pressure opposite him so he can't get triple teamed at times, and give him some help on the defensive side of the ball so he can be the dominant defensive player on that side of the ball that he can be.
I really foresee the Browns doing that. On football in general, you cannot have enough secondary help, as the Browns saw this year. As the secondary kept being depleted, guys had to step up, and you can't have enough defensive line help, specifically edge rusher, which we saw really hurt the Browns after Olivier Vernon was injured and he missed their playoff run. Those are the 2 spots I really plan on the Browns allocating their draft resources to this offseason, finding another edge rusher up front, maybe 1 or 2 of them, and then loading up probably on 2 or 3 defensive backs, that being corners or safeties. They're going to look for high-grade guys that can do both, of course. But specifically about the edge rusher, even if Myles Garrett wasn't here, of course, I would emphasize your need for one. But the point is, it's not as much about teaming up a guy for Myles as it is just having guys you can rotate in there. Adrian Claiborne's signed a 2-year deal. He'll be back next year. He is much more of a role player than an every down guy, but that's the point. You have 3 or 4 bodies you can rotate, stay fresh. Then all of a sudden in the fourth quarter, you have Myles Garrett peeling his ears back, getting after the quarterback, because you have younger guys on that edge who can spell him at times, or just take older guys like Adrian Claiborne off the field. It's a hole that the Browns must address, and I plan to do that in the first 2 days of the draft.
Now, you're a guy that watches a lot of the All-22 and takes a look at the analytics type things. Who are guys that step out and jump out as having had good years? I know you do the Pro Football Focus thing and you follow that pretty closely. Who are some guys that really grabbed the attention of the analytics world for the Browns?
Yeah, look, there's a handful of Browns players that had really impressive years this year. That's how you go from a team that was projected to be 7-9, 8-8 to winning 11, 12 games. The guys I've mentioned before, Wyatt Teller, he came out of nowhere to now be one of the best guards in football. But some guys I want to dig into deeper here that I think deserve some naming. Let's start with Rashard Higgins. He had a PFF grade of 73 this year. This is a guy who really has been an afterthought throughout this organization each year, from regime to regime, just not being able to find a spot. This year, he's barely brought back. He's not active for the first 3 or 4 games of the season. And then just by necessity, just by injury, he steps in and becomes one of this team's leading receivers, one of the most clutch receivers on this team. Led the Browns in receiving yards in the playoff game versus the Chiefs. And believe it or not, his DVOA score, which is a stat from Football Outsiders that I really lean on, I've talked about before on the show, he's the 3rd overall receiver in DVOA, just across the board. He's in the top 10. And look, that sounds like, okay, that's got to be an outlier. But he's in the top 10 with guys like Julio Jones and whatnot, that Devontae Adams, that make it solidified that, all right, this is probably something here. I'm not saying he's a top 10 receiver, but when it comes time to pay Rashard Higgins this offseason, some smart teams are going to look at that data and realize, all right, this is a sleeper number 2 receiver that we might be able to get more out of. And that might be tough for the Browns to want to match that type of deal, considering what he came in on. So that's going to be something really interesting to watch. I think another guy worth mentioning is David Ninjoku. He didn't have the numbers of a premier pass catcher, but PFF, he was an outstanding pass blocker and run blocker. He became the Browns' best blocking tight end, quite frankly. Something you probably don't expect from a first-round guy early, but he transitioned. A guy who wants to be a number 1 tight end and a pass catcher ends up being a premier blocker. But that's what Kevin Stefanski asked him to do this year. On the defensive side of the ball, Ronnie Harrison, Olivier Vernon, both in the upper 70s for their PFF grade for the year. Ronnie really stepped up after being traded from Jacksonville, and he needed like 3-4 weeks there to learn the offense. But once he did, he had a good 6-7 games in there before an injury later in the season. And then he couldn't really get back into the fold of things. But as a building block going forward, I expect Ronnie to be a huge part of this defense. I already mentioned how Joe Woods prefers to have 3 safeties on the field. Ronnie's going to be one of those guys going forward. Two guys that I think we have to mention that it's just a little disappointing, probably major disappointments if you're Joe Woods, honestly. The first one being Mack Wilson. He had the third lowest PFF grade on the team behind Jacob Phillips, who is another rookie linebacker, this will be an issue all offseason that we're going to talk about once again as the linebacking core. But Jacob Phillips, at least, is a rookie who showed some promise and a prototype, at least, of a linebacker they're going to be looking at. You have more patience with him. Mack was a guy they expected to take a jump, and I know he was hurt early, but that jump just never happened. At one point, he was inactive, demoted. I don't want to say doghouse type thing because that brings back memories of last year, but there was just something going on where he wasn't clicking with that defensive unit, and they felt he was disposable. We'll see what that means for his future going forward. Sheldon Redwine, another guy who got some chances late, but really didn't make much of it, only a 42.5 overall grade. And the thing with Mack and Shell and Redwine is that, they're from that same rookie class, and it seems like those guys aren't going to be a long-term answer in this organization. And that was something we needed to figure out this year, and I think the Browns got their answer.
Ellis Williams, we'll step aside, take a quick timeout. Ellis mentioned Rashard Higgins. That's a guy that you got to decide. Do you offer him a contract? He's a free agent. We're talking some fifth-year options, some contracts, maybe some salary cap casualties for the Browns. Ellis and I will be back. More sports and less Levine. We will be back after this timeout. Stay with us.
Presque Isle Downs and Casino has sports betting. Use one of our 50 state-of-the-art Bet America kiosks to place your bet and watch your favorite games on one of our many HD televisions or visit our sportsbook area. Only at Presque Isle Downs and Casino.
Do you like Ohio State football? Would you like to get information from me, Doug Lesmerises, about Ohio State football without having to look at my face? We have got the plan for you. Become an Ohio State text subscriber through cleveland.com. You send a text, 614-350-3315. What do you get? 2, 3, 4 texts right in your phone every day about Ohio State football. Inside information, polls, voting, all kinds of things. You can be on our podcast. We take text subscriber questions on our Buckeye Talk podcast every week. If you really want to be involved with Ohio State football, in season or out of season, become an Ohio State text subscriber from cleveland.com. Send a text to 614-350-3315. 14-day free trial. What do you have to lose? $3.99 a month after that. 614-350-3315. I'll see you in your phone.
Tri-C is here for you. Now more than ever, you need a post-secondary education. So I encourage you to start your journey here at Tri-C. The majority of fall classes will take place online, but we've added a variety of formats to meet your learning needs, and we've taken many steps to keep you safe on campus. Whether you're ready to get started or your 4-year plans have changed, Tri-C is where futures begin.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students, kindergarten through 12th grade, can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. More sports and less Levine continues. Dave Bacon with you. Let's bring Ellis Williams back in. Ellis, one of the things when you are a good football team, you have really good players and you have to make some tough decisions. So let's start with Baker Mayfield. It's probably a no-brainer at this point. Fifth-year option is picked up. At what point do you start talking long-term deal with Baker? Or do you say, boy, we really like what you did. Let's see 16 more games of that.
Yeah, let's start with the fifth-year option. This year, it was unclear whether that was going to be something the Browns wanted to pursue Baker Mayfield put that to bed right around the Tennessee Titan game probably. They're going to pick that up, especially with it expected to be a lower number, around $18 million. That's a bargain for a starting quarterback in today's NFL. So you're right. Now it's shifting gears to talking about an extension, the type of extension we've seen Lamar Jackson flirt with now. Josh Allen's now eligible for. Patrick Mahomes already signed. Deshaun Watson already signed a year ago. That type of money that makes you a $40 million a year type quarterback. Baker Mayfield probably isn't quite that yet. His resume doesn't really compare, quite frankly, to Josh Allen or Deshaun Watson, or of course Patrick Mahomes yet. What he is probably more looking at is a $30 million, $35 million type deal in that Jared Goff, high-end Jared Goff, low-end Ryan Tannehill, middleman Kirk Cousins type range. And that's the tough part for the Browns. Where do you land on this? Mary Kay Cabot, my colleague, did a lot of excellent reporting, as she always does, on this topic. And people around the NFL seem to think that the Browns don't have a complete assessment on Baker yet. He, of course, had a great end of his rookie season, a sophomore slump. And then up until Odell Beckham Jr.'s ACL injury, he didn't look comfortable back there. He looked like he still had some sort of the yips going on. And then everything changed, and it clicked, and that's a credit to him. It's a credit to Kevin Stefanski. They completely flipped it, and he looks like a quarterback you can win playoff games with. He proved that this season. But things change quickly in this league, and there's two cautionary tales, both in Los Angeles right now with Jared Goff, who makes $31 million a year. That contract is just kicking in this season. If you're following NFL news at all, you know that both Sean McVay, the head coach, and the GM Les Snead have been very tongue-in-cheek about what they're trying to do with Jared Goff, saying he's quarterback at this moment. Everything's being evaluated. Those are far from glowing endorsements compared to what you hear out of Baltimore, where it's like, I plan on having the GM, of course, saying I plan on having Lamar Jackson here for a very, very long time. Another one, Carson Wentz. Philadelphia was a mess this year. It seems like they're going to try and fix that project. But the point is, there are some cautionary tales right now, Jimmy Garoppolo being another one, of quarterbacks that signed that big contract, that $100 million deal that makes them a $30, $40 million guy. And then after a year or two, the team's not interested anymore. Something changes, or that quarterback wasn't exactly who they thought they were. Remember, Jared Goff and Jimmy Garoppolo have both played in Super Bowls. They've started Super Bowl games, both losing by a score, single-digit score. And they're now being questioned as their team's undisputed leader, and just are they going to be there in 1 or 2 seasons? Things change so quickly in this league, which is why I would caution the Browns into getting into a long-term situation and then becoming the Rams or the Eagles in a year or two here. Do I think Baker Mayfield is capable of delivering the Browns fans what they ultimately want? In a perfect situation, probably, but I'm wondering if he's closer to the long lines of Kirk Cousins, who, as a person from Minnesota who has a lot of Vikings friends who are fans. You saw this year with Kirk Cousins that if everything isn't perfect, if the offensive line isn't elite, if the receiving options aren't unbelievable, that things start to fall apart. He doesn't correct problems. He's just a great distributor of the football when everything is really set up around him. So the jury's still out on Baker Mayfield. He's a proven quarterback. He can win football games in this league. It's just trying to figure out if he should be paid like a top 10 guy.
The other thing is if you wait, you may have to pay him more, but you, from what you're saying, that might be the prudent thing to do. Is if he goes out and does it again and earns a little bit more money, okay, he's earned the money, let's pay him a little bit more. If you wait and see he performs, he'll drive that price up. But the Browns may be willing to say, okay, you've earned that extra money.
Yeah, and the reason will likely go up if they do wait is because the two guys I just mentioned, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, whenever these new market resetting deals get done, it does exactly that. It resets the market. Another one is Dak Prescott. Prescott expected to sign something this offseason, but with it being Dallas, who knows what's actually going to happen there. Those type of contracts will then inflate what Baker Mayfield could ultimately ask for if he ends up performing like any of those three quarterbacks I just mentioned. But you're right. I think it'd be worth waiting because you'd rather pay a little extra to ensure that this is a marriage you want for the next 5 seasons rather than becoming the Rams and worrying about a $40 million dead cap with a quarterback that you're not in love with anymore.
Another guy that's is part of that same class, Denzel Ward, and that one's got to be even tougher. You have the fifth-year option with him, the extension potential with him. What do you think the Browns do with Denzel Ward? And he's been banged up. When he's been in there, he's been pretty good.
He's been excellent when he's been in there, dating back to his rookie season and then stretches of this year. He just played like a Pro Bowl caliber guy, the type of cornerback that you don't hear a lot from, which is fine because that means they're not throwing to him, or he's just deflecting the pass and it's an incomplete pass. That's okay. I like my cornerbacks kind of like I like my referees. If we don't hear from them, that's fine. That means they did probably a good to excellent job. So I think the Denzel contract, though, you worry about having to pay him like a Jalen Ramsey, which he probably isn't just based off physical traits. You find some more stability in the fact that he might be okay with, $13 million a year, somewhere around there, where it's not a market resetting type deal, but it puts him in the top 10 comfortably, which is really the same conversation we're having with Baker Mayfield. Like, are these guys top 10 talents? But when you're dealing with contracts, it's so few times does it turn out that these guys are actually top 10 talents. It's just what happens in the market and what that offseason looks like. And I think Denzel's in a position slightly ahead of Baker to be the Browns being comfortable, like, all right, we're going to lock this guy up long term. There's less question marks about him.
Let's put Wyatt Teller and Nick Chubb together. Chubb is a guy it's going to be really interesting. You don't have the fifth-year option on Chubb because he was a second-round pick. The fifth-year options are only there for first-round picks. What do you think about Chubb and Teller, and how difficult are those decisions for Andrew Berry in this front office?
Right. The Browns front office is hitting a point of that executives dream of, but it's also what keeps them up at night when they do nail their roster evaluations. A guy like Wyatt Teller probably guaranteed himself $50 million this year just with the way he played. He's going to be asking for $12, $13, $14 million a year like the other top guards in this league. Nick Chubb, being a running back, we know what the market does for them. It is completely suppressed, especially over this past 5 years or a decade, that running backs aren't valuable. But I think Nick Chubb's a different breed. You can look to Derrick Henry last year with the Tennessee Titans, signing a $50 million deal that put him right between the $11 and $12 million range. That is a top running back contract, but the Browns last offseason locked up Kareem Hunt quietly at about $6 million a year through the 2022 season, I believe. Now, is Nick Chubb worth double what Kareem Hunt is? That's where this gets extremely difficult. Does that work in the locker room? These things become very complicated when you start talking about production versus actual paycheck. And I know there's code in NFL locker room. You don't ever look at another man's paycheck, but people are watching. You know what these guys are making and what it is. And I'm not saying anything would happen between Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. They both want the best for each other, but money talks. And if the Browns have to set a market value at Nick Chubb, which is probably right around Derrick Henry, that means he's going to slide it and make double his running mate. And that remains to be seen if that's something the Browns want to do. And also, it's an analytically driven front office, and we know what analytics say about the running backs. I've been on the record saying Nick Chubb's just a different breed. Pay him, but coming off a disappointing playoff game, who knows where things are at. I still think the resume shows, and really this team without Nick Chubb during that middle chunk of the season hit a low point, and I thought the offense rediscovered itself once Nick Chubb was in the offense. He's earned his paycheck.
Last thing I'll ask you before we take a quick break and turn our attention to the Senior Bowl and the draft, Higgins and Goodson. So Rashard Higgins, B.J. Goodson, a couple of guys that are not big name, big time contract extensions. What do you think the Browns will do with them? Is that things that they will look at and would like to get back at the right price?
Yeah, let's start with B.J. Goodson. I think that's a guy who really proved himself this year. Again, not the best way to go out in the season in the playoff game against the Chiefs, but when your team loses at the end of the year, you probably can say that about a lot of guys. B.J. Goodson proved himself as a great run stopper, a leader, an excellent communicator, and was better in coverage than you would have anticipated. I think Joe Woods did a good job protecting him at times in his scheme. Didn't ask him to get sidelined in his sideline. Instead, it asked him to have his proper depth in his drops, and he stayed on top of that pretty well. He's earned a second contract. I don't know at what length. These probably tend to be 2 or 3 year deals, and that would make sense at a lower number, under say like $6 or $7 million a year, maybe that $8 million range. Rashard Higgins gets a little more complicated because of just the raw numbers he was able to put up of how needy the wide receiver position is and the depth that this team has at wide receiver, on top of the fact that this wasn't a guy they were in love with to begin with. I don't know what happens with the Rashard Higgins situation. It's going to be fascinating to watch. We just listed 5 players, and I said the Browns should re-sign all of them. So we're starting to talk, some strain on the cap here for a cap that we suspect to go down. But Higgins is a guy, again, who's proven himself as a quality number 2 or number 3 receiver, an outside the numbers type guy who can win at the point of attack, create separation with his crafty route running and his larger frame. And that connection with Baker Mayfield remains one of the better connections in football. I think it would be a disappointing day for Browns fans if they saw Higgins and Baker split up. But that's what happens in this league. It's about the money. Where can these players get paid as they should? They deserve every dollar. And Higgins will be something really, really interesting to watch, because I think the outside interest in him is going to be stronger than a guy like B.J. Goodson, who I expect the Browns to retain quite easily.
Ellis Williams, we're going to step aside and take a quick timeout. On the other side of the break, we'll take a listen and point out some guys you should listen for as the Senior Bowl is being played on Saturday. We'll also listen to some other names that you might want to pay attention to as the Browns try to add through the draft to this roster. More sports and less. Levine will be right back. Dave Bacon in with you today.
We're living in uncertain times, but you don't have to put your future on hold. At Tri-C, you can move ahead while staying safe and saving money. The majority of fall classes will take place online, but we've added a variety of formats to meet your learning needs, and we've taken many steps to keep you safe on campus. Whether you're ready to get started or your 4-year plans have changed, check out Tri-C's programs and resources, because Tri-C is where futures begin.
Well, hello, everyone. Let me tell you a little bit about Browns Football Insider. For only $3.99 a month, you can get text sent right to your phone each day from me, Dan Lobby, Scott Pasco, and Ellis Williams. In addition to that, you'll receive a Football Insider newsletter every day with special things from us, things that you won't see anywhere else on the site. You'll get breaking news, analysis, features, film breakdown, and things like that. Texting us directly gives you a great chance to cut through the clutter of Facebook, Twitter, other social media, and avoid the trolls. Also, it's the only way to get your questions on the Orange and Brown Talk podcast. So why should you sign up? Try a 14-day free trial. You can cancel at any time. All it takes is one text, but you won't want to cancel. We have hundreds of subscribers join us over the last year. They love it and have stayed with us. We're seeing the Football Insider community grow every week. And it's only $3.99 a month, which is less than 14 cents a day. What I like most about Football Insider is the opportunity to connect with you one-on-one and really communicate with you. So how can you become a Football Insider? You can click on cleveland.com/Browns, the blue banner at the top of the page. Or easier yet, text me at 216-208-3965. Again, that's 216-208-3965.
It takes attention to detail. With your local Bryant dealer, you're getting more than just a technician. You're getting someone who pays attention to your needs and the little things that make a big difference. It takes a dealer you can rely on. And to keep your family warm this winter,
here, let me show you how this works.
It takes Bryant.
Bryant. Whatever it takes.
And to keep your family comfortable, it takes Smiley One Heating and Cooling. Find them at SmileyOne.com.
More sports and Les Levine continues. Dave Bacon in tonight, along with Ellis Williams, Browns beat reporter here on cleveland.com, as well as in the pages of the Plain Dealer. Ellis, let's turn our attention to the Senior Bowl. So mock draft season has started. Mel Kiper Jr. has the Browns taking Aaron Robinson, a cornerback from Central Florida, with their first pick. He's a guy that will be in the Senior Bowl this weekend. What do you know about him? What do you see about him? What do you think about him?
Yeah, this is going to be such an interesting offseason to evaluate this talent. We were texting in the morning about Aaron Robinson and the mock draft that Mel put out. And I started doing some research, and I noticed that other sites had him outside of the first round and far down. Draft Network had Aaron Robinson at their 12th corner, which would put him well outside the first round, possibly outside the first 2 days. He's a 5'11 corner, under 200 pounds. He just weighed in the other day down there in Mobile, Alabama at the Senior Bowl. And what was disappointing about the weigh-in and the measurables, first, that he's just under 6 feet. And this is where stuff gets really particular, but that's what you're doing when you're evaluating these talents. Every inch matters. And he also had relatively short arms at just 30 inches, and those were both disappointing to see. And I know fans are going to think, it's just his arm, or it's just this, it's just that. It's on defense, leverage really matters. And when you're a cornerback, being able to punch and win and hit that receiver first with those longer arms is something guys look for. So the lack of height, from what I've been reading, was disappointing. And for me, as a guy who's evaluating talent, the shorter arms worry me at times, larger receivers being able to just get free from him. But then it's not just Mel Kiper who projects into the Browns. Daniel Jeremiah of the NFL Network, who does incredible draft coverage, also pegged him as a first rounder. So this is going to be a long offseason and a slow build towards the NFL draft in terms of where these guys are positioned. The tape is limited due to the college football season we had. So landing on consensus with these guys is probably going to be difficult throughout this entire evaluation process.
And the other thing is the combine is not going to be what it was, so it's going to be a challenge to evaluate some of these guys, especially based on the limited number of games that were played by a number of them.
It's exactly it. Again, it's going to be the most fascinating offseason in recent memory, probably ever in NFL evaluation history as we build towards this draft. No combine. There's going to be an emphasis on pro days and the regional combines they may be able to do. The Senior Bowl has an extremely heightened emphasis this offseason because, like you said, there were fewer games. The college football season this year, quite frankly, in my opinion, was a mess. It's going to be hard to find accurate tape on these guys. They're going to get the medicals. They figured that out from last season in the offseason, dealing with all that. But just the raw game tape. I mean, a lot of these young men have opted out in 2020. So you're looking at game tape that may have only been from their freshman season or their sophomore season, one season of college football, 10 games, 600 snaps, 700 snaps. There's going to be some gambles. Expect teams to trade out to either accumulate more draft picks or just to get out of this draft in general and put all their eggs in 2022 and just push the buck down and be like, hey, we don't have enough information. And rather than taking risks, we're going to just trade out and you guys can take who you like if you're confident with these guys, because we're not. I expect movement. I expect surprises, just like we started with Robinson, a guy who in one site and one source is the 12th ranked corner in his class, and then two mock drafters who the industry really respects has going in the first round. We're going to be all over the place this spring.
All right, having said that, some names to keep your ear out for, some guys you think might grab the Browns' attention.
Yeah, the Browns are in need of defensive players, and I think that's where we need to start. Miami's edge rusher Gregory Rousseau is a player who, again, only has one season worth of tape. He opted out this year, but he's a 6'6" edge rusher who, as we started the show talking about, is a guy who could complement Myles Garrett really well. Rashard Weaver out of Pittsburgh is another name to watch, I think. Again, really good length. He had an ACL injury in his junior season, but played really well this year. And not a first-round type of guy, but a third or fourth-round guy that you could find some value with late. And again, I can't emphasize enough how important that's going to be. If Andrew Berry really trusts his regional scouts and the homework they've done, then this has the ability to be a draft that they completely clean up in. It did really well last year in a virtual draft setting, and this could be a year where some of the older heads, some of the GMs who aren't as comfortable with being virtual pass, and the Browns are able to clean up. Linebackers to watch for. I think Zavon Collins is a guy we have to keep an eye on out of Tulsa. He's going to get a lot of buzz in connection to the Browns. He is projected, 6'3", 250, the type of prototypical linebacker build you like, but he's fast. He can get sideline to sideline, which is something you don't see often with guys of that size. The prototype, I think all Browns fans need to keep in mind, is Jacob Phillips from last year. The Browns showed the type of linebacker they're looking for. Horizontal speed, lateral quickness, 6'3", 230, 240. That's what Jacob Phillips is. And Collins is a bigger back that can also move. I've read that he's a better fit in a blitz happy team, a blitz type of scheme. So scheme's really going to matter, especially defensively. Scheme matters a lot. Some of these offensive guys, it can be athletes and you can just get them in space and see what they can do. Scheme is going to be a huge part of what dictates where the Browns go in this draft. But again, edge rusher, the guys I named, those are athletes you plug and play. More on the back end is where we're going to have to watch player specific and how they end up matching what Joe Woods wants to do.
A couple of names to listen out for, you think, potentially in that back half that might be guys the Browns look at as we wrap up our segment here on the draft?
Yeah, I think Javon Holland is another name I got to watch. He's a number one safety right now out of Oregon. The safety group this year doesn't have a standout guy, so they're going to fall more towards the back end. Same with linebacker. There's probably one or two guys that go in the top, but then those where you can find a value are those 3 or 4, 5 range players that could have probably been day one guys, but you take positions like quarterback. I mean, we've got, I think, 5 quarterbacks projected to go in the first round here. Tackles are going to be a necessity, which the Browns don't need. And this is why the Browns are going to be able to find value. I think another name to watch, Paris Ford out of Pitt. There's going to be Pitt defensive players throughout this draft that are going to have ties to the Browns. He's a 6-foot safety, 190 pounds. And one more guy I want to give you guys is Nick Bolton. He's the number 4 linebacker right now. I think he's out of Missouri. He's a guy who is a little bit undersized. He's 6 feet, 6'1". I'm waiting to figure out what he measured in and what his measurables will be, because that'll have a lot to do with where I grade him in terms of how he may fit for the Browns. He's a little smaller than that prototype I mentioned, but his tape's incredible. He's springy. His instincts are sharp, and he's right now the number 4 linebacker. And again, these consensus there's never going to be a consensus. These will move, but right now, a guy like that being the number 4 linebacker is where I see the Browns being able to add value, because there's going to be guys that gain momentum, but once all of that dust settles, trusting your research is where you're going to find that value compared to the mock drafts that tend to, as odd as it sounds, they really do influence what happens on draft day.
Ellis Williams, Browns beat reporter here on cleveland.com, as well as in the pages of the Plain Dealer. Appreciate the time and the insight as always. Sure we'll be checking back in with you next week. That'll do it for this edition of More Sports and Less Levine. We will see you again Monday. Bud Shaw, the scheduled guest. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe. We'll see you Monday.